elections correspondent for the Federalist. Brianna, thanks so much for coming on the U.S. Report. I want to start with some stunning revelations. And I mean, this seems like something out of a movie, but apparently our friends at the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is, of course, that group that's been putting all of that money into aid organizations and foreign aid, but also into opposition newspapers in friendly countries and doing all sorts of things like funding, transgender basket weaving in Gabon and things like that. Well, they've been instructing employees to shred and even burn classified documents. Tell us about this.
Yeah, this is very interesting. The New York Times did a pretty thorough report on this, but apparently workers are being instructed to, like you said, shred and burn classified documents, and there are efforts to stop them because some people are saying, well, what are those documents? What's being contained in the documents? And I think the larger point here is we have spent the past few years, or I should say the left has spent the past few years going after Donald Trump for classified documents, right? That was the biggest scandal. And now you have people who are burning classified documents, allegedly. It makes people say, what is on those documents, and why don't you want the American people to know what's being burned, or why are you hiding this information?
Well, and what do you suspect might be in some of these documents? Because I think some of the most interesting things that USAID might have been up to involve, political interference, not just foreign aid like giving out, vaccines or AIDS medication or things like that, but going out and funding opposition newspapers, funding opposition parties, and interfering in democracies that we're supposedly friends with.
Yeah, well, the United States does have a pretty long history of interfering in other countries' elections, their political business. And I think for most Americans who are actually welcoming this idea of slashing U.S. aid and all of this, international funding, we are only more resolute in our position when we hear that these documents are being burned. Because if they were on the up and up, if U.S. aid was doing what it's supposed to be doing and it wasn't being nefarious, they would have no reason to hide anything or to burn or shred things. So this only bolsters Donald Trump's efforts to downsize the federal government and to stop wasteful spending.
Hey, Brianna, I want to move on to another story that's been breaking in the last couple of days. I spoke a little bit earlier about this with Miranda Devine, but I want to get your take on it. There's an autopen, which is a thing that basically automatically signs documents. And apparently, the Conservative Heritage Foundation has found that dozens and dozens of executive orders and other documents signed by former President Joe Biden were actually authorized with identical autopen signatures, including things that were signed when he was apparently off on vacation, which he was for about 2/3 of his presidency. Does this raise any questions to you about who was in charge during the Biden presidency?
Oh, absolutely. We have seen from reporting, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, that there was essentially this secret cohort of people who were running the Biden administration. Joe Biden was delegating authority to non-elected officials. He was not doing the duties he was elected to do. And when we talk about this autopen, he who controls the pen clearly controls the entire country. And it's one thing for a president to use an autopen here or there, but to have a pattern of using it for numerous documents, including numerous pardons, it makes you wonder, why was Joe Biden unable to do that? And of course, we know the answer. This man was in cognitive decline. There's a good chance he didn't know what was being put in front of him. He probably didn't even know that something was in front of him. They probably never gave it to him, right? But there has to be some serious accountability. We cannot let Democrats fall to the wayside when they had 4 years of unelected bureaucrats running this country, and we're supposed to say that's okay?
Hey, speaking of unelected bureaucrats, let's move over to our friends at the Environmental Protection Agency, the ultimate sort of unelected bureaucracy running people's lives, where new boss Lee Zeldin has signaled the most consequential day of deregulation in American history after the agency announced that it is going to roll back a series of environmental regulations, including rules on pollution, coal-fired power plants, climate change, but most notably electric vehicles. Is the EV mandate dead in America? Brianna, Lyman.
It should be. And, every time I see Lee Zeldin do things like this, I'm always a little bit hurt. He was almost our governor in New York, and he would have done a terrific job here. But when people like to talk about climate change, they don't understand that, first and foremost, Americans' actions on climate change really are a drop in the bucket, because China is responsible for a third of the world's emissions, right? Carbon emissions. And so even if we take all the most extreme measures that the left wants, it is being offset by China, by India, by countries who do not follow the same sets that we do. So why should we burden American manufacturers and Americans who just, want to run a certain amount of water from their shower head or when they flush their toilet, when that's not actually making real change? And I trust that Lee Zeldin is making appropriate cuts where it's needed and leaving in the things that everybody can kind of come to the same page and agree on.
And Brianna, I wish we had a Lee Zeldin here in Australia, because you can't convince people here that our emissions don't make any difference either, and our power bills are through the roof. But, on the subject of electric vehicles, I see everybody going out, all these lefties going out and torching Teslas and protesting against Teslas. Yes. Is it funny to you and ironic that these Teslas were supposed to be the thing that saved the planet, but now that their owner has gone the other way, well, it kind of reveals to me that really it's not about the environment, it's about control. What do you think?
Absolutely. If electric vehicles were going to do so much, bring so much benefit to our environment, they would not be torching and, releasing all these fumes into this country. And I think it's unfortunate what's happening with Tesla, because what the left is trying to do is they are trying to normalize political violence and teach Americans that political violence is the same as First Amendment protected free speech and protests, because they want to legitimize this. They want to desensitize Americans to political violence against Republicans, and it's been part of a very years-long effort that they've waged.
Absolutely right, Brianna Lyman. Thank you, as always, for joining me on the U.S. Report.